Okay, today we're going to talk about, last week talked about, may you live in interesting times. This week it's clear that we live in perilous times. As you know, we talk each week about the convergence of events that are talked about in Bible prophecy, and it certainly appears that these events are converging, they're accelerating, they're happening at an even greater pace. And 2 Timothy chapter 3, a passage that we refer to quite a bit, because I do think that as we saw the conventions the last couple weeks of the two major parties in the United States and other things going on around the world, it certainly appears that that these things are, this is happening in our time. 2 Timothy chapter 3, it says this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers. By the way, does anybody see people like this in the world today? And other than just at the church, I mean, out there in the world. Without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. So let's look at some of the things that happened this week that sort of bring these verses to life. We mentioned the Pokemon craze here recently. This is the headline in the New York Daily News yesterday: beware of Poke pervs. And what they're doing is they're putting, I don't know how this, apparently there's a tag or something, and there's like a little creature that you go and collect, or I don't know. I don't know. I don't play the game, so I'm just sort of, so don't write in and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. But this is a crazy game, and there's these little creatures, and people go and look for them. When we had our picnic at the park last Sunday, you saw people walking around looking at their phones, and the park rangers told us that the parking lots would be full because people are coming out there playing Pokemon. Well, now what some of the sex offenders are doing is they're setting up these creatures around their house and that type of thing to lure kids. So if your kid's doing it, your kid needs to be supervised when they do this. I saw a video this week of some guy who was playing Pokemon, or he saw people playing Pokemon and he acted like he was interested in them. And these were young kids, like 12, 13, 14 years old. And he said, oh, yeah, there was one over here. You want to come with me? I think I'll show you where it was. And they started to go with him. And he goes, would your mother let you go with a total stranger? And they said, oh, I didn't think of that. So this is, and so now we see the confirmation of that in the New York Daily News yesterday. Brian sent me this morning. This is the front page of today's Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post is one of the major newspapers in the United States. And here at the bottom of the front page, kids' new extracurricular, after school Satan Club. So what a group in Salem, Massachusetts is, and if you go to Salem, Massachusetts, you'll see a statue of Samantha Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched, because it was a center of occult activity. There were really witches there, and they made that sort of a part of their tourism industry there. And the guy who's in charge of this, the Satanic Temple's Utah chapter, said this. He calls himself Chalice Blythe. We think it's important for kids to be able to see multiple points of view, to reason through things, to have empathy and feelings of benevolence for their fellow human beings. And so they're trying to get this implemented in schools, after-school Satan clubs. They figured, well, look, the Christians can have their after-school Bible clubs. Why can't we have our after-school Satan club? Because to them, everything is equal. There's no lines of demarcation as to one's better than the other. Everything goes. This is what 2 Peter chapter 3 said. In the end times, people will be lovers of themselves. They won't be able to understand the truth. They won't be able to distinguish between right and wrong. And we see this playing out day by day by day in our world and culture. That's the front page. Okay, now look. I'm gonna step into the minefield of politics. Okay, and you cannot take a stand in this day and age because everybody is more righteous than the other person and they know better about the world. And it's just, my Facebook feed, I just stopped looking at it for a few days because it's just a constant screed of why you should vote, who you should vote for, why you shouldn't vote, and if you vote, you're just part of the world system, blah, blah. And it just, so listen, I'll say what I said last week. Pray about it, stay in the Word, and vote your conscience, okay? I don't think that that's sinful if you vote. But there's certain people that if you vote for will have consequences. And so this week, look, the Republicans, they had a lot of junk at their convention that I don't agree with. They had a Muslim close in prayer. I think they had a Sikh pray. They had somebody get up and support gay rights and that sort of thing. Look, they're both parties, they're secular parties, and they're going to do worldly things. I get that. We live in a world where people do worldly things. So we just have to decide how far we can go in participating in that. And again, I think it's a matter of Christian liberty and conscience, fully informed by the Word of God and prayer. So this is an editorial from Ramirez taking up the Bill Clinton-Hillary cartoon challenge. And you can see there some of the things that she said and talked about in the past and done, and people they've taken money from. It was interesting, one of the things that happened at the Democratic Convention this week was I heard the wall they built around the convention center was 4 miles long. And a friend of mine, give credit to Daniel, who I don't know if he came up with this or he saw it, he said, yeah, the Democrats built a wall to keep out other Democrats. Think about it. Probably true. There was the email controversy that happened in the week. John Podesta, a friend of the Clintons, was interviewed on CBS this morning the other day about the email hack into the Democratic National Committee. And it's, here's his interview.
Hillary. Your campaign has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of trying to interfere in this election with the DNC email hack. Is your campaign, specifically HillaryClinton.com, concerned that your campaign may be hacked by the Russians?
Well, look, they are obviously taking active measures here. We think we have very, very robust defenses against that. But, the State Department's been hacked. The White House was hacked when I was in the White House. It is, when you're dealing with military intelligence units, which evidently were the people who hacked the DNC, according, to the experts in the New York Times, you have to do everything you can to prevent that. But if you talk to any corporation in America, particularly when you're talking about government.
In light of that, should you not assume that the Hillary Clinton server was hacked?
No.
Why not?
Because there was no evidence of it.
Okay. By the way, she's okay on all the classified stuff, right? According to the mem. This came out. Clinton campaign computers also hacked after his interview. This is I don't know who did it. It could be somebody masquerading as the Russian. It could be a Russian. It could be a private person. There is no way that her email server that was in somebody's bathroom in their condo in Colorado was not hacked. It's just not possible. And there's going to be leaks of things. You're going to see it coming on. Of course, Trump made a sarcastic comment about, well, Mr. Putin, maybe you ought to go looking for the 30,000 emails that her attorneys deleted. Oh, look, he's in bed with the Russians and that type. Listen, folks, the New York Times a year ago had an article about the fact that the Clinton Foundation took millions of dollars in donations from people associated with uranium companies. 20% of the United States uranium was sold to Russia with the approval of Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. So stop this nonsense about Donald Trump making a sarcastic comment. I could care less. This lady has committed treason against the United States. She is a liar, and she is not fit to run for public office. But vote your conscience, okay? Mr. Trump will be here tomorrow, I believe, in town. And listen, we're going to have, this county that we sit in where we have church is one of the key swing counties in the United States. Within the top 5, is my understanding. And the northern suburbs of Franklin County are swing precincts and counties. I don't know about you, our phone rings all night long. It starts ringing about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I come home at night, and it's ringing again. And the ads on TV here, I have friends in California that say, we don't even know what the presidential ads are like because nobody plays them out. I'm like, it really does sound like paradise out there in some respect, because it's going to be relentless. So I apologize if I offended anybody, but listen, there are some serious issues at stake in this election. How the Supreme Court is going to go. And look, I think the Lord's coming back soon, but I can't guarantee it, right? I don't have that information. Nobody has that information. So we have to plan. For example, I think the Lord's coming back, but I still say for retirement. What was the famous statement of Martin Luther? What if you knew the world was ending tomorrow? What would you do? Plant a tree, I think is what he said. And you can do the fact check on that quote too. I think that was Martin Luther or somebody like that who said that. And it's true. We don't know. So we have to plan as if we're going to be here for a time in the future. And if we're going to be here for a time in the future, if you don't care about your kids and the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, vote for her. Go ahead. I'm just telling you, that to me is the critical core issue in this election. And it's my own opinion. It's not the opinion of the church here. I'm just telling you what I think. But it is a very important point. The New York Times had an editorial last week. Why make it so hard to vote in New York? Now, there was a court case this week down in the Fourth Circuit that covers North Carolina. And North Carolina had put in a requirement that you have to have a photo ID to vote. The Fourth Circuit said that's discriminatory. The intent behind that is discriminatory because it's clear who that is directed to. And you can't require that because minorities will have trouble getting a photo ID. Well, okay, North Carolina, make it free. I think it's free. It's free anyway. And we have to do photo IDs for everything. And the Democrats, you saw them parading around at their convention. We need free vote, let's everybody vote and all this stuff. This picture was taken at the Democratic convention where they handed out the delegate credentials. Attention all delegates. Photo ID is required for credential pickup. Please have photo ID out and ready. Okay, yeah, that is called hypocrisy on steroids. The other thing that somebody noticed, I picked this up off of Hot Air, one of the blogs I checked. This was at the Democratic convention, all gender bathroom. So this guy, he was a guy, he self-identifies as a guy, the guy who wrote this, the author of this blog piece. So he decided to go find just a men's restroom. And he said, I didn't have to look far because I just looked next door and there was the men's room. Well, what he did was he went around and checked all the all-gender bathrooms. And guess what? The only restrooms that had been made all-gender bathrooms were women's restrooms. Who do you think cares about your kids, folks? Seriously. This week it was reported, this is from a couple months ago, Women Deliver, fourth global conference, the world's largest global conference on health, rights, and well-being of girls and women in the last decade. And they say the world's largest global conference on health, rights, and well-being of the girls and women of the last decade. Well, Hillary Clinton sent a message to the women's conference about what she would do for women. I'm not going to make any commentary about the title of her talk. You can draw your own conclusions, okay? Hillary Clinton's message, entitled A Purpose-Driven Life, was described as a thought-provoking video from former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton on women's rights as human rights and how to translate that vision from the 1995 World Conference on Women in Beijing to action in the 21st century. She said this, but as you know all too well, our work is far from finished. This is an important moment as we chart a course to meet the new Sustainable Development Goals. Those were developed by the UN. The blog post said this: laws and policies that ban, restrict, or regulate abortion and religious and cultural beliefs that value life from the moment of conception are all, quote, barriers to progress from the pro-abortion point of view. So we will play these clips a number of times this year. Listen, if you don't like her speaking, and unlike her husband, you're not able to fall asleep when she speaks. Did you see the clip of that? Tim Kaine saw the camera and he kind of leaned forward to block the camera view. And, well, if the Lord tarries and she's elected, you're going to hear her a lot. So maybe that's a reason to vote against her. I'm just saying. If you're looking for reasons, okay. A year ago, a woman in the World Conference, she said, there's two clips I want you to listen to, because this is what you're going to get.
All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will, and deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will, and deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
Okay. That clip needs to be played. Oh, I saw some other blogs putting that up now. I think that clip needs to be played over and over and over again, because we've had a change. And it was Republican presidents like George Bush 43 and Bush 41 to some extent, and Clinton, changed the executive branch in our government, and they do a lot more than they used to, and Congress doesn't seem to be able to stop them. And so, listen, do you think that she will do more than Obama did? I mean, it should be patently obvious. Our balance of power system is broken. The Supreme Court is no help, at least in its current configuration. It might help if it's a 4-4 tie and it's the right decision below. But this is a very important part of this election. Okay, so let's look at this. This is a different type of terror attack in France last week. It was Monday or Tuesday. In the Normandy region of France, a couple of Islamic terrorists identifying with the Islamic State went in and slit the priest's throat at the altar there in the Catholic Church in France. That followed a string of 12 days, what the Wall Street Journal called 12 days of violence across Germany. attacks. A guy went after people on a train with a machete. There was somebody who blew himself up near a nightclub in Ansbach, Germany. There was the shooting in Munich. There were all these attacks in Europe. And of course there were the 84, 85 people killed in the truck attack in Nice, France during the Bastille Day celebration. And it's a problem. It's having consequences. Here's the Islamic State claims the Germany bombing. In the Toronto Sun, this author, Tariq Fatah, said the media is in denial over Islamist terror. And the Jerusalem Post this morning, the long war on terror. I think this is a reprint of an editorial or commentary written for the New York Times last year. The stark truth is that the Western elite remains in denial. And this is true. You had to go several days at the last convention held before anybody brought the subject up. In fact, when the Medal of Honor guy was up there was booing. A Medal of Honor winner. And there's booing at the Democratic Convention. Breitbart reports this. Even now, Muslim writers are saying this: Islam is to blame for global terror. In a radical turn of events, Muslim writers from across the Arab world are admitting that that Islam itself is a problem. And the only way to curb the terror carried out in its name is to conduct a fundamental overhaul of Islamic texts and their interpretation. I would suggest to you that if they change the text, it's not Islam anymore. It's some other kind of religion. But it's having an impact. These are beach chairs that are usually full this time of year in Germany. Not a single one occupied. The tourists that Europe was banking on. It's easy to get a place to stay in France and in Europe at this time of year because people are afraid. I showed you that picture that I took on the street in downtown Columbus 6-7 months ago. This stuff is everywhere, folks. When it happens, where it happens, how it happens, nobody knows. It's hard to figure out. This is an old editorial of Ramirez from Investors Business Daily. You see radical Islam, that's the ammunition. Political correctness is the silencer on the rifle. That, by the way, if you look up Ramirez, I don't think he does Investors Business Daily anymore, but just look up Ramirez cartoons. They're really, really good. They're about the only ones that I use here. James Comey this week, speaking at the FBI forum on Homeland Security at Fordham University, had this to say.
We can't take our eye off what is largely a future threat, and that is at some point there's going to be a terrorist diaspora out of Syria like we've never seen before. Not all of the Islamic State's killers are going to die on the battlefield. Hundreds and hundreds of them, when the coalition succeeds, and I'm confident it will, in crushing the Islamic State, through the fingers of that crush are going to come hundreds of really dangerous people, and they're going to flow out primarily towards Western Europe, but we might as well be right next door to Western Europe, given the ease with which people can travel. And this is an order of magnitude greater than any diaspora we've seen before. A lot of terrorists fled out of Afghanistan in the late 1980s and early 1990s. This is 10 times that or more.
He gave similar testimony to Congress just a couple weeks ago.
I think what I would do in just a few minutes is just highlight the way in which we in the FBI are thinking about the primary threat to the homeland, which comes at us in the form of the so-called Islamic State, the group that we call ISIL. And that's a threat that has three prongs. It is an effort by ISIL through their poisonous propaganda to motivate people to travel to their so-called caliphate. Second, an effort to inspire those who don't travel to engage in acts of violence, especially directed at law enforcement or people in military uniform. And the third prong of that threat, which we talk about less, but we in this business focus on every day, are the directed efforts. That is, their efforts to send people to the United States to kill innocents, or to specifically recruit and task people in the United States to kill innocents. Those are the three prongs of the ISIL threat. There is good progress that has been made against the so-called traveler threat. Since last summer, we have seen a drop in the number of people attempting to travel to the so-called Islamic State. That may be a function of the fact that the message has gotten out that people will spend a long stretch in jail if they attempt to travel. It could also be a function of the fact that people have discovered that the so-called glory of the Islamic State is nothing but a mirage and it's hell on earth. It could also be something that involves people staying home to try and do something on behalf of the Islamic State. So we don't take great comfort in a drop in the number of travelers. The second prong is the one that dominates our lives today. As Secretary Johnson mentioned, there are hundreds of people in the United States who are consuming the propaganda of this so-called Islamic State and being motivated to move towards violence. And our job together is to find those needles in a haystack. And in fact, our job is harder than that. It's to find pieces of hay in that haystack that may become a needle and disrupt them before they move from consuming to acting on that poisonous propaganda. Those are, and the most painful examples of that recently obviously are Orlando and San Bernardino, but there are plenty of others around this country. We've arrested 4 just in this month to disrupt them, people who are moving on that path from consuming to acting on violence. And the last prong, as I said, is one we never take our eye off of for the reasons you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. We all know there will be a terrorist diaspora out of the caliphate as military force crushes the caliphate. Those thousands of fighters are going to go someplace, and our job is to spot them and stop them before they come to the United States to harm innocent people.
Is he suggesting that we vet them, maybe? Oh, well, I'll tell you, I watched these people on TV about what a certain candidate said about this, and it's just, I think people have lost their ability to reason. The Economist looked at it this week on their cover, the new political divide. Some are saying welcome and some are saying keep out. And this goal of building a borderless world where your country doesn't matter has kind of hit the wall of reality that there are evil people out there that want to do harm and tear down what's left of your country and create their own world order called Sharia law. It's a fact. It's not made up. It's real. This is the history of Islam. It has been this way for 14 centuries. If the Lord doesn't come back for 14 centuries, it will be that way for 14 centuries unless they make a new religion. I'm sorry, it's the way it is. It is a fact. I see people saying, oh, they're just making up this Islamic thing. They're not making it up, folks. It's real. Yeah, they're using it for their own advantage. Yeah, I get that, okay? But that doesn't mean they made it up. Here's a report this morning. Many Chinese are joining the extremists in Syria. Now, how would that happen? Well, we've talked about this. China's the most populous country in the world, but what have they had in place for a generation or more now? One-child policy. What does Chinese culture favor in terms of what kind of, if you're going to have one child, what do you want it to be? A male. So they kill females. They abort them. Same thing happens in India, the second most populous country in the world. And so the result of that is that between China and India now, they are getting close to a number of 200 million males that have no reasonable prospect for a wife. Run the numbers on that. It undermines and destroys civilization. And so now we see these unattached males going off to make war. Big surprise, right? I mean, did anybody not see this coming? Yeah, the people who run the world never saw it coming. The people who run China never saw it. So now that genie's out of the bottle and they can't put it back. And they have a major, major problem. And it's going to impact their society. For the rest of the time, I'm going to focus on the Middle East, Turkey, and Russia. And I'm going to try to approach this a little bit differently. Look, we know that the focus of end time events is Israel and Jerusalem. Israel in general, Jerusalem in particular, and the surrounding region. Although it will involve the whole world, the focus of a lot of things will be there. So we know from passages like Ezekiel 38 and 39 that there are people that come against Israel in the last days. And there are countries. And one of those countries is Turkey. That's why what's going on in Turkey right now, I think, is very significant from a prophetic standpoint. Exactly what's going on, there are as many different opinions on that as there are people writing about it. So let's try to make a little bit of sense of it. And there's also Russia. Now, there's a lot of dispute. Is Russia involved in the end times? Is it involved in Ezekiel 38? I personally believe that it is. There are good Bible scholars to think that it's not. But I have thought this for a long time based on the way what I read in the scripture. Somebody coming from the uttermost parts of the north. Well, there's one country that really fits that in relation to Israel, uttermost parts of the north. And I know Turkey is north of Israel as well, but Russia is also. So I think that there's a lot of things going on. This is a blog post from Israel Rising today. The Great Game, Turkey-Israel détente, Russian-Iranian cooperation, and the Kurdish question. And there's one other factor that they forgot about, and that's Russian-Turkish cooperation. And I'll have an article to share with you about that. But listen to what this blog post said. I just saw this morning. Well, it just came out this morning. Right now, barring a severe flare-up in Israel's northern border, the Great Game of the Middle East is in its early phases. Geopolitical maneuvering is still fresh and fluid. Boy, that's an understatement. Russia may opt to play neutral in the burgeoning alliance system and let Iran and Syria go it alone. Russia may also be able to convince Israel to remain neutral as well in exchange for security promises. But listen to this comment. No matter the outcome, this great game will not take 100 years like the last one, as America's pullback has shuffled the deck and wrought chaos on what already was considered a chaos on what was already considered a chaotic region. And that's an understatement too, because the whole area is in chaos. It was 5 years ago that the Arab Spring started. Just 5 years ago. So I'm going to look a little bit at some of the history. One of the things that's going on, of course, is Turkey, a country that was a Muslim empire called the Ottoman Empire that controlled much of the Middle East, even into Europe, knocking on the doors, knocking on the gates of Vienna is one way to look at it, for several hundred years. That's how far they advanced. At one point, Islam advanced up into France and was put back in around 722 AD in a famous battle at Tours. But it occupied the Iberian Peninsula until pretty much until 1492 when they were expelled. That's Spain and Portugal. And you go there today, and you still see a lot of Islamic influence in the architecture of those buildings. So Turkey is a very critical country. It is the transit point for people trying to get to the Schengen zone, which you see in purple. And I haven't updated that because we're not sure what's going to happen with the United Kingdom yet. But these flows from the Middle East, from Iran and Syria and Iraq, flow through Turkey. Turkey is the transit point. And so it has tried to play that for its advantage. I mean, Erdogan is not an idiot. He's an Islamist. This coup that happened, a lot of people say Erdogan tried it. I'm not sure about that because Turkish society is very complicated, and to try to let that genie out of the bottle when you don't know it would have been an incredible risk for him to take. And maybe he took it. am skeptical that he did. Recent things are that the purge continues. Probably up to 60,000 people have been jailed or lost their jobs. 50,000 people have had their passports pulled. Erdogan is cracking down. He wants to be the new caliph and the caliphate that he wants to build. And he has the backing of a lot of people. They must have an app over there in Turkey for their phones that's something like Rent a Mob, that, just say we need some protesters over here, and they show up doing the chants in support of Erdogan when things are happening. Let's see what this one is. Oh, slide out of place. Later, the Western elites in denial, they're going to continue doing what they're doing with regard to immigration from the Middle East. Angela Merkel, when they have attacks in Germany, she could come out and say, we're going to slow this down, we're going to vet people better, that sort of thing. What does she do? We're going to continue doing what we've done. It seems insane, doesn't it? I mean, by any objective measure, it's insanity. It's irrational. But she's the leader of Germany. Okay, now back to Turkey. In April, in the Washington Times, Daniel Pipes, who's a pretty good analyst of Middle Eastern affairs, he's not always right, and I think you probably missed this one a little bit. What happened was Erdogan wanted to get some money out of the Europeans. And he's got a problem. He doesn't want all these immigrants coming through his country anyway, even though they may share some of the same ideology, because they may not share the values of the Turkish culture. So he wants them to pass on through, but he has control of it, so he decided to hold the Europeans up for some money, and they agreed to pay him billions of euros in exchange for managing the flow. And Pipes thought this was a bad thing. He said this in his editorial in the Washington Times. Initially, Mr. Erdogan accepted the traditional autonomy of the major institutions in Turkish life. Law courts, he talked about Erdogan's rise to power. Law courts, the military, the press, banks, schools, no longer. Now he seeks to control everything. And this has been apparent for the better part of a decade, if you're paying attention to what's going on in Turkey. He's wanted to become the new caliph ever since he came to power. Remember, he was in prison because he was too extreme in his Islamic tendencies back in the 90s when he was mayor of Istanbul. He was actually jailed for a while. I guess it's part of the resume in Turkey that if you're going to run for a higher office later, you've had to serve time for something in a political purge prior. Initially, Mr. Erdogan maintained cautious and correct relations with Moscow, benefiting economically and using Russia as a balance against the United States. But since the reckless Turkish shootdown of a Russian warplane last November, followed by a defiant lack of apology, French President François Hollande has publicly warned of a risk of war between Turkey and Russia. Now this was just 3 months ago this editorial was written. I want you to remember that. This is just the start. In combination, these errors by Mr. Erdogan point to more crises ahead. Gökhan Basic, a professor at IPEC University in Ankara, notes that Turkey is facing a multifaceted catastrophe, the scale of which is beyond Turkey's capacity for digestion. If Iran is today the Middle East's greatest danger, Turkey is tomorrow's. And this was a page out of the New York Times or Washington Post. Erdogan echoes an earlier leader. They talked about a leader, I think his name was Menderes, that was arrested in 1960. He was the president of Turkey, and he was executed in 1961. And that's a picture of the mausoleum in Istanbul. It's been made into a public shrine of some sorts. The purge has had other impacts. Christians are said to be paying the price after Turkey's turning more and more to Islam. And I've talked to a person who lives in Turkey, and he says, this was a decade ago, and he was telling me, you have to be extremely careful with your Christianity. You cannot share it openly, or you will be arrested and killed, is what he said. So these migrant flows are coming from Iran, Iraq, Syria. Of course, Syria doesn't really exist anymore. Iraq really barely exists anymore. The countries are falling apart. The migrant flows are coming from those areas across Turkey into Europe. The other problem that we have that's kind of here is in this green area is where the Kurds live. Biblically, they were the Medes of the Medo-Persian Empire. They're a significant minority. I believe they are the largest minority or ethnic population in the world without their own country. And they straddle, as you can see, they straddle Iraq, what's left of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. In Turkey, they are about 20% of the total population of Turkey. I think the population of Turkey is around 80 million people, so that means there's 16 to 20 million Kurds living within Turkey. And Erdogan's kind of had a very iffy relationship with them. This week, the Islamic State hit the Kurdish area with its suicide truck bomb, and it killed 44 people. You know, look, we get upset when there's a priest is killed in Normandy, but in these areas of the Islamic State and Iraq and Pakistan, there are dozens of people, it seems, that are killed every day by these terrorists. And it's a huge problem. The death toll is mounting. Here's another map showing the orange area of the Kurds. Here's a little bit better map. The green areas are where the Kurdish ethnic Kurds live. And this is a huge problem. Russia doesn't know what to do with them. Iran, Iraq, Syria doesn't have time to worry about it. Turkey doesn't know what to do with them. It's a big problem. Here's a little stats on the targets of the purge. 21,000 teachers have had their licenses revoked. 15,200 education ministry officials have lost their job. 8,000 police have been removed from their jobs. 1,000 arrested. 7,500 soldiers have been detained, including 85 generals and admirals. 3,000 members of the judiciary have been suspended, including 1,481 judges. 1,577 university deans have been asked to resign. 1,500 finance ministry. Listen, this is why I don't think Erdogan necessarily did the coup, because the military plays a very important role in Turkish society. The police play an important role. The judiciary, just like they do in our society, they help maintain order. You don't get those and expect things to be okay overnight. It's a very risky move. And so what he's done in essence is, in his efforts to purge the Gulenists from the military. Gulen is Fethullah Gulen is a Turkish imam. He lives in the Poconos. We've talked about him. Set up a bunch of schools, about 100 schools here in the United States that are supposedly technology-oriented, but they're Islamist. And he and Erdogan were together for a while. Now they're very clear rivals. So what Erdogan is doing is purging Islamists from the military so that other Islamists can take over that are more loyal to Erdogan. But you can't do that and expect your military to be as effective the next day as it was before. So now that has made Erdogan have to look elsewhere for assistance in keeping his government going. Now, the United States has already pretty much withdrawn from those areas in large part. He's not going to get it from there. So where does he turn? Well, Russia seems to be a very real possibility. And there's a reason for that, and I'm going to spend the rest of the time looking at that. So, General's accusation is the latest sign that NATO is in trouble. This article just was 2 days ago. Turkish President Erdogan accused U.S. General Joseph Votel of siding with coup plotters in the Turkish military Friday, marking the latest sign of fractures within the NATO alliance. And this is a Twitter feed. Erdogan lashes out at the U.S. General Votel. Who are you? You are taking sides with the coup plotters. Erdogan's using social media. Here is, this is his name, Brent Miller from NBC. Their chief foreign correspondent, Richard Miller. Entering Votel, a few days ago at the Aspen Forum here in Colorado here in the United States. Here's General Vodal. Here's what he said.
Now, is this just you looking forward and analyzing the situation and saying, well, this is something we are going to be concerned about, or has something already happened in terms of ability to launch operations or cooperation that gives you reason to be concerned?
Yeah, I think you've already seen, it's been in the open press, there's been some limitations on some of our activities at Incirlik Airbase, for example, the power and a few other things were shut off. That's been restored. We're kind of back to normal operations there. There are other places where we are continuing to work through some of the friction that still exists with kind of the follow-on activities. That is impacting some of our operations. We've got ways to mitigate that, to manage that right now, and we are, but I am concerned about the longer-term impact. So there are certainly near-term things that are taking place, but there are also longer-term things that are taking place. And I'll give you an example. One of the things is we've certainly had relationships with a lot of Turkish leaders, military leaders in particular, and so I'm concerned about what the impact is on those relationships as we kind of continue to move forward.
Are any of those people in jail now?
I think yes. I think some of them are in jail.
Do you think that Turkey is dismantling its military and other institutions of the state? And if so, what does that mean for its ability to cooperate within NATO?
Well, that's probably a better question for the Department of State, or at least for General Scaparrotti, the EUCOM commander.
Ooh, I believe he's in the room.
Anyway, sorry, Scap. I don't know. I mean, they are absolutely, they've been an important NATO partner. They've been an important partner to us for a long period of time. And so I think we just have to, they certainly have to work through, they're a sovereign country, they have to work through their own issues. I think we have to be supportive of that where we can be, but we also have things that have to get done.
By the way, I'll play Richard Engel clip. We haven't played this one for a while. I found this very interesting. This happened in April 2011. He had returned back to New York in the midst of the Arab Spring and everything falling apart over there, and he was interviewed by Brian Williams, or asked a question by Brian Williams on NBC Nightly News.
You're back here in New York for a few days. The question I've seen most people ask you, where does this all end?
This whole movement in the Middle East, and I'm worried about it, because while people in the region deserve more rights and they want more rights and they're embracing more of the will of the Arab street, well, the will of the Arab street is also ferociously anti-Israel, against Israel. And there's many people who believe that if you empower the Arab street, and the Arab street wants to see a war or wants to see more justice for the Palestinians, that down the road, 3 to 5 years, this could lead to a major war with Israel. It could also force a negotiated settlement. But I think over time, this thing ends in Jerusalem.
I always found that kind of an interesting comment if you haven't seen it before. So this morning now there's this report, there's these protests outside the Ursula Airbase in Turkey, and when they had the power shut off, remember General Vodal said the power's been restored now. Now Erdogan's mad at Vodal, so now they have supposedly 7,000 police surrounded the base, a bunch of dump trucks. Everybody wonders, are they taking over the base? Are they going to go in and get the 50 to 80 nuclear weapons that are there? I don't know. We'll have to see how this unfolds over the next day. There's supposed to be a big top general from the United States come and visit the base. It may be that this is just being to set up security and people are protesting when the security is around. I don't know. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. A lot of people have different views. But listen, this I mentioned earlier, this was in Gatestone Institute just the other day. On Monday, Turkey-Russia pact threatens Western interests in the Middle East. So here's what's happened. Remember, Erdogan is, while he is stronger in some respects, he's much weaker in others. So these guys are chess players. They understand. They're making moves way ahead of what I think a lot of people, our analysts, are thinking. And listen, you saw General Vodal. He's probably a smart guy, probably a good politician. That's why he's a 4-star general now. But, you know, he even he's kind of struggling, at least publicly when he speaks, to explain exactly what's going on, because it's very, very complicated. So Russia and Turkey have now entered into a pact. In recent months, the Kremlin has hinted that keeping Assad in power is not its primary concern. Rather, its main objective in Syria is to keep its strategically important base country. To suggestions that in return for building closer relations with Turkey, Moscow might be prepared to do a deal whereby Assad is removed from power and Russia's military interests in the country are safeguarded. So Russia's playing off different players, okay? They're cooperating with Iran, but they don't want Iran to get too powerful, because Russia has its own Islamic problem. We'll talk about that in just a moment. If that outcome could be achieved, then Russia and Turkey would be able to forge a powerful partnership, one that would pose a serious threat to Western interests in the Middle East and beyond. The deepening diplomatic pact between Turkey and Russia represents yet another damning indictment of the Obama administration's ability to maintain relations with Washington's traditional allies in the Middle East. Western diplomats regard the decision by Turkish President Erdogan to restore relations with Moscow last month as part of a carefully coordinated attempt by Ankara to build a new power base in the region. He wants to be more powerful. He needs a little bit of Russian help now. For decades, Turkey, a key NATO member, has said that it wants to forge closer ties with the West, to the extent that Turkish diplomats insist that Ankara is still serious about joining the European Union. But the increasingly hardline Islamist approach taken by Mr. Erdogan in the wake of the failed military coup, which has seen tens of thousands of judges, academics, and journalists forced from their jobs, has caused the Turkish government to realize the prospects of maintaining relations with its Western allies are remote so long as it continues with the current crackdown. The big stumbling block preventing Turkey from having better relations with Russia was that Moscow was helping to keep Assad regime in power through the military intervention by Russian forces that began last year. But in recent months, the Kremlin has hinted that keeping Assad in power is not its primary concern. Well, I read that earlier. So here what they want to do. They want to do a deal whereby Assad is removed from power and Russia's military interests in the country are safeguarded. And if that outcome could be achieved, then Turkey and Russia would be able to forge a power partnership, which, like I said earlier, one that would pose a serious threat in the Middle East, a threat to Western interests in the Middle East and beyond. I'm not sure why I have about 6 of these slides in here. It was just a decade ago that Russian president said this. He told the nation Monday that the collapse of the Soviet Empire was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. So I want to look a little bit about, okay, what's going on with Russia? Because this is a very complicated geopolitical thing, and I'll just give you a 5-minute sort of summary of what's going on. There is a guy named Alexander Dugin. I've talked about him before. He is a mystic. He is closely tied to the Russian Orthodox Church. He is a Russian patriot. Some would call him part of the far right in Russia. He wants Russia to be strong. There have been a number of papers written back in 2008 and then in 2014 about him. Russian-Turkish rapprochement through the idea of Eurasia, Alexander Dugin's networks in Turkey, Alexander Dugin, a Russian version of the European radical right. And what Dugin's vision is, and he's very influential with Putin, is that there would be a Eurasia. They know that, they want these countries, you see Russia up there, you see Kazakhstan, the Stan republics, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, as we commonly call them, the Stan republics. They're Islamic republics. They used to be part of the Soviet Union, and they are oil rich in many respects. Kazakhstan is a huge country. It's probably a third the size of the United States land-wise. So you can get an idea of how big those countries are. And they have oil and gas that Russia and Turkey want to control. Turkey wants them to go across the pipelines and stuff to go across Turkey so they can tax it and that sort of thing. And so Dugin has, for a long time, wanted to get Russia to look at a greater Eurasia because he thinks it would protect Russia from collapse. So what he's proposed is that he set up networks in Turkey to accomplish this so that Russia and Turkey would have better relations. This has been something, so the fact that they came out this week and said Russia and Turkey have a pact for better diplomatic and relations and cooperation in the region is not a surprise, because this is what the intellectual guys behind Putin have been pushing for a long, long time, particularly Alexander Dugin. So this is not really a surprise. It's just, it seems like it's happened overnight, but they've been working on it for a long, long time. Listen to this article. This is from the Jamestown Foundation. There are many reasons for this change, which concern Russia as much as Turkey and Islam. Vladimir Putin's Russia corresponds more clearly with Dugin's ideological expectations. Dugin is a strong advocate of reinforcing Russia-Turkish relations and of the development of an assertive Russian foreign policy towards all Muslim and Asian countries. And this is exactly what Putin has been doing. And this thing was written 8 years ago. Turkey, for its part, also changed tack around 2000. Its disillusionment with the EU, the tensions within NATO over its role in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the instances of destabilization in the Middle East have all reignited identitarian polemics. The idea that Europe is the natural and inevitable future of Turkey is no longer accepted as why it's not no longer as widespread as it used to be. Lastly, after September 11, Dugin felt compelled to moderate the positive vision of fundamentalist Islam he formulated in the 1990s, and instead endorse a more moderate and secular version of Islam, which the Turkish model occupies a relatively important place. Listen, Russia has a Turkish problem. The demographics in Russia don't work. Russia will soon be, I think if things didn't change, by 2040, Russia is half Islamic. Its population. Its military will be half Islamic by the close of the next decade. So this is a huge problem. I want to jump ahead here. In Foreign Affairs, published by Council on Foreign Relations, picked this up in 2014 and did a thing on Putin's brain. Where is Putin getting these ideas? And that article focused in large part on Dugin and his influence. And Putin is using a number of different things to foster his power in the region. This is from just before that article appeared in Foreign Affairs, there was an article on the editorial page of Investors Business Daily. This was in March of 2014. It was right after the Sochi Olympics and that were held in Russia, and it talked about the fact that this strange event happened. Some of you have heard this before. Putin took an icon. The icon is called the Lady of Kazan. You see it sitting on the table between Putin and John Paul II when he went to the Vatican back around 2004. It is the most venerated icon of Russia. The original was destroyed, a copy was made. The original led the Russian armies, or the copy led Russian armies into battle when they fought Napoleon and defeated Napoleon in that great battle. This icon was at the head of the army because the Russian Orthodox Church and Russia are joined at the hip. They're one and the same. And Putin has been pushing this. And so this icon, by the way, you see this. This icon was eventually, so the original was destroyed. They made a copy. It was in a church in Russia, and then it disappeared. But it appears that the copy ended up in Fatima, Portugal. I don't know how. It ended up there, and people in Fatima saw the icon of the Virgin Mary, the most venerated icon in Russia, and so they gave it to Pope John Paul II. And Pope John Paul II's dream was to take it back to Russia. So what happened in 2014, in fact, there were ceremonies that took place. He actually had a ceremony where you can see him here, Pope John Paul II in a big auditorium, venerates the icon. And he wanted to take it back, but he got sick and too frail, so he had it sent by one of the top cardinals in the Vatican. It was taken and was put in this white church here that's located in the Vatican, not the Vatican, the Kremlin in Moscow. By the way, the icon that John Paul II had, he had in his private chapel, and he prayed to it every day. I know this is weird. Well, what Putin did was he took that icon, put it on a plane, and flew it around the Crimean Peninsula. Why? Because he was going to take over Crimea, right? I know you're also, I just think this is kind of interesting how all of these different geopolitical and religious factors are kind of coming to play into the surface here at this time when we know all these people are major players in the end times. And so when Francis went and met with Krill, there was the icon again. And this guy, I understand this Krill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, was a former KGB guy with Putin. I'm not sure if that's true. Putin was very close to Solzhenitsyn. And these are these articles from March 18th of 2014 in the Investor's Business Daily, where they took this. So there's a lot of talk. The Economist did an article last week, what happens if Russia breaks up? And they looked at all these things, and it's a very frightening task. And so there's all this push by Putin to keep everything together. But he has this Islamic problem. And I've suggested for a long, long time, those of you who've listened to me for a while, you know that I was talking 15 years ago about the fact that what draws, if Russia's a player in Ezekiel 38, what draws them in? And I suggested then, and I still stand by it until I'm proven wrong, and then I'll say, well, I guess I got that one wrong. But I think Russia would be pulled in by the fact that they have those Muslim countries, part of the former Soviet Union, that they want to keep the Muslim population under control for a while. And so what would invading Israel, saying, I'll help you destroy Israel, would that be something that would put you in good stead with them? I think so. I do think that those stand republics are very significant prophetically. And I'll just close with this. In Israel, I think we get in trouble in our country with the things that we're doing. And the EU, the United States, the UN have all come out and now condemned even more strongly Israel having the audacity to build apartments in Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem and other parts of what they call the West Bank. Parts of the West Bank that they know in any final deal would go to Israel if there was a two-state solution. And the U.S. State Department came out, Kirby came out, the spokesperson, and said this just the other day. This is a press release or statement that was a press statement from John Kirby, department spokesperson for the Department of State. We are deeply concerned by reports that the government of Israel has published tenders for 323 units in East Jerusalem settlements. This follows Monday announcements of plans for 770 units in the settlement of Gilo. We strongly oppose settlement activity which is corrosive to the cause of peace. There will be a continued push for a two-state solution. I personally think that it might succeed for a very short period of time, but I think that is a trigger for other conflicts because it won't go well. You know it won't. When they gave up Gaza, it didn't go well. The same thing would happen on a more massive scale if they gave up what's called the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, to the Palestinians. It's going to lead to war. And I think there are prophecies that deal with the outcome of that conflict. You can go read the book of Obadiah. I think it's a direct prophecy as to what's going to happen to the people of Eden, which the Palestinians identify as Edomites. They have that as part of their ethnic heritage. And I personally think that that's who those prophecies are directed to, and they're not pretty pictures that are. Go read the book of Obadiah and just insert in there the Palestinians, the West Bank, and that type of thing, and you'll see that it's not a very pretty picture about what happens, but it's what God says will happen if people try to divide up the land. And the people most at the forefront of that are certain Arabs. And I think God eventually will deal with it. Now, there's great prophecies about repentance on the part of Islamic nations and Arab nations and Bible prophecy as well. Mike Claplin's done a good teaching on that. So we know that this is where it's going. This is, it's all kind of fitting together. The chess pieces are moving into place. And it'll be interesting to watch as it goes here for the next however long it takes. So let's pray. We'll take up with these topics again next week. Father, bless us as we go this week. Lord, I pray that we will be able to discuss in the spirit of truth and love issues that are facing us here in our country and other Christians in other countries during this upcoming election. Lord, I pray that you will help the body of Christ not to divide over this issue, but to act with each other towards kindness. Pray that you'll give us wisdom as we have decisions that we need to make. And pray that you will direct us in the way that you would have us to exercise the rights that we have in our country. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.